I recently had a colleague of mine ask about whether or not you could perform specific FortiOS API calls from the iOS Shortcuts app. Turns out you can. Um, before before looking into this, I had only done simple webhook calls, if this then that, IFTTT, but never really fully crafted a full API request on iOS. So I decided, hey, let's go ahead and take a look at this and see what it would actually look like, and figured out it was actually pretty cool. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to create an API admin user, apply an API admin user profile. Actually, we're going to create the admin profile and specify that it's our API admin user profile. From there, we're going to take the access token and start playing around with PostMan to take a look at what the API call needs to look like. What we're trying to do in this video is build an API call that can either disable or enable a policy. From there, we're going to take what the actual API request needs to look like, and we're going to apply it in the iOS shortcuts. So let's go take a look at what that would actually end up looking like. I'm using FortiOS 7.0.9. I'll be using Postman for our API work that we're going to do to figure out what the request looks like, and ultimately I'll end up using my iPhone that's running the latest version of iOS. I believe it's iOS 16.1.1. So this should work in previous versions, but just so you know, this is what I'm using. So if it doesn't work, let's start with that. So what we have here is a FortiGate VM. It's deployed. It doesn't really have much of configuration. The idea was to actually test out this concept on something that's non-production. So I went ahead and created a simple policy from LAN to WAN. It's a LAN zone. This can be an interface or anything. What matters really here is the policy ID, because we're going to be looking at that pretty closely later on. And I'll move this column over here so it's easier to see. Policy ID 1. And we don't have any admin profiles other than default. We don't have any other users other than the default system admin. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new admin profile. And one of the reasons you may want to do this for your REST API admins is so that you can limit what this API admin account can do. Specifically, let's just call it REST access. And maybe I don't want it touching security fabric, FortiView, user and device. Maybe I want to customize what it can do for firewall objects. In this case, I'm just going to do a full read write. I don't want it accessing log and report in this case, or system settings, but I want it accessing the network. Maybe if I want to deploy VPN with it, and maybe Wi-Fi and switch. So we just want to limit what this account can do. If you don't envision it using any of these other capabilities, leave them disabled. Limits your blast radius in the event something goes wrong with this or someone makes a mistake. This can really save your hide. Great. Created the REST access admin profile. Now let's go ahead and create that REST API admin. So the username in this case, I'll call him UV REST. The admin profile is going to be REST access. I will not add a PKI group. And in this case, I'm not going to enable CORS allow origin. If you wanted to use the try it out feature on FNDN, you could go ahead and enable that and say, hey, enable CORS from FortiOS, FNDN.fortinet.net. I'm also going to restrict login to trusted hosts. So in this case, it's going to be my local 24 and one more just at 0/24. Perfect. Okay, great. I'm going to copy this API key. Now, typically, you should not let anyone have access to this. In this case, this is a VM. It's not running any production traffic, and this VM is going to get destroyed after we're done with this video. So I'm fairly comfortable with just, getting fairly comfortable with this being on screen. That being said, you should guard this as if it's your own admin account password. While we're at it, let's just go ahead and set the trusted host here. And great, perfect. So we've got this going for us. Now, if you don't already have access to FNDN, that's Fortinet's developer network, you should contact your Fortinet account manager and their systems engineer because they can sponsor your access. Once they've sponsored your access, you'll get access to the API and you'll be able to do a whole host of things. One of the things they walk you through is, okay, let's go ahead and generate the API token, which is what I just walked you through. But if you need reference material for this, and there's a little bit more on the core's allow origin here. And then they'll walk you through your first API request. Now, in this specific use case, they're using just the access token as a URL parameter right here. There are other ways of authenticating, and if you go down here to authentication, this can actually walk you through that. So if you're not happy with having to put your access token in as a URL parameter, you can use other different capabilities. It is recommended that if you're using URL parameters that you use HTTPS, and the reason why is because the actual URI, which is everything following the FQDN, is encrypted in the TLS stream. If you use HTTP, obviously people are going to be able to see that. So keep that in mind. So what I did is I went to the FortiOS 709, because that's what we're running, configuration API. I went to the firewall subsection and took a look at what we had available to us there. Okay. And as you can see, anything under, if you were to type CLI config, firewall, and whatever you want here, in this case, we're going to do firewall policy. So we need to find firewall policy. Quick way to do that is probably going to be just doing Control F, but I've already stumbled across it. So perfect. What we have here is a different couple of methods. A get is basically get me the policy. So if I said get, if I just put in this slash firewall slash policy and no policy ID, what's going to end up happening is going to pull all the policies. In this case, not that big of a deal, as you show here, because I've only got one policy. But if you got thousands of policies, you might want to worry about the policy ID if you want to use what we're about to do in this capacity. A get just gets the information. A put updates a put updates an existing object or an existing policy in this case. A delete, well, self-explanatory. If you do a get policy, don't specify a policy ID, you're going to get all the policies. And if you obviously want to create a new policy, you would use a post with the with the parameters required. Now in this case, I'm going to want to do a put since I've already created the policy. And we can take a look at the actual model as to what it needs to look like and what's required. So this is anything that goes into the policy. In this case, we want to make note of anything that's required because this is going to need to be called out in our um, API request body. So we'll go down here, take a look. And most of this is not required unless you're requiring to change it. Now, if the only thing that's really required is going to be the policy ID here. So, okay, great. This is all good and all. Oh, one more thing. If you wanted to take a look at the example value, what it would look like, this is all example. So you just want to be mindful of that. But here's what we're going to do. So let's bring PostMan over here and size it so it actually fits in the window. So you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and craft our first request. And in this case, your request is going to look something like this. HTTPS :// API gate ultraviolet.local. Okay, so it's going to start with that. And then API v2 CMDB. And the reason why we're doing CMDB is going to be because of the fact that this is the configuration API. And then, if you recall, we went to firewall policy and policy ID. So I'm going to grab that here and I'll just paste that there. So this is a URL parameter. As you can see, it got added because it detected it. The policy ID we're after is going to be policy ID 1. So now we can go ahead and run this. Before I run this, want to caveat this with the certificate running on this is a trusted certificate. So if we take a look at that, take a look at the certificate, you can see that it's, oh, oops, here, let's do that. It was created by my local FortiAuthenticator I was using as a CA, and I've imported that CA certificate into the Trusted Root Certification Authorities. This is pretty important. Postman by default will not let you run queries or API requests against self-signed certs. Now you can turn that off. I don't recommend that because basically if you're getting manned in the middle, you might not know that. May not be important for a lab environment for production. I do recommend you use trusted certs. Another thing, I do recommend that you use trusted certs because iOS tends to error out as well. So I had to import my local CA um, for this FortiAuthenticator just to get this to work. So if you were using public FQDNs and public facing domain names and certificates, publicly trusted certificates, none of this would be a problem. I wanted to call that out in case you went halfway through this and go, hey, wait, what the heck? Why isn't this working? All right, so let's go back to Postman and actually send the GET request. Boom. It's going to return back a bunch of gobbledygook, or at least to the uninitiated is what it's going to look like. This is called JSON, and it's been prettied up. So prettied up means it's just been made easier to read. What JSON stands for is, or some call it JSON. I don't know the appropriate pronunciation, and feel free to let me know. Is JavaScript object notation. This is basically a way of notating objects, pretty lightweight means for web services consumption. Some of the things that we may care about in this case are going to be the results. In this case, the results, policy ID is 1. Well, that's anticipated because we kind of already asked for that. But another thing we need to worry about is the status of the policy. In this case, it's enabled. Okay, cool. We made a call and we got policy information. Now let's go take a look at that policy one more time. It's enabled. That's a given, right? So enable this policy. That's great. What would a request look like from Postman? A lot of devs use this. A lot of, especially folks who aren't familiar to JSON or to REST APIs, use this tool to kind of figure out what that request needs to look like. So if we go back to our API reference, we're going to see it needs to be a put. Okay, put needs to happen. So we can go there, and this needs to be put. Our URL can remain the same. So I'll copy and paste that there. The body needs to be raw. The format needs to be JSON. All right. So let's see here. Let's start with this. I'm going to keep this relatively simple. And policy ID. And it needs to be 1. Since this is an integer, I can get away with that. And then status is disabled. Is it disabled or disable? So it's enable. So let's do status disable and see what happens. Now, if you're wondering if I'm just winging this, not really. I can go back to the model and take a look and see what values there are there. In this case, it's enable or disable. So I'm not completely winging it. We've got that there. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and send this. Okay, it's a pet. It's a put. Success. So we put that there. If we perform this get again, now the status is back to disable. If we actually go look in here, firewall policy. Oh, look, it's disabled. Fantastic. Now, this is a pretty simple API call to make. It relies on an object that's already existing, but okay, what does this look like on the iOS side of things when I need to make this call? Let's dive into that now. So before we get too far down the how do you configure this in iOS, I wanted to talk a little bit about um, the JSON um, structure, how it's structured and laid out. JSON is structured in a manner that is commonly known as a dictionary in the programming world. Why it's called a dictionary, I don't know, but I do know that dictionaries have something very unique to them in that they have a key value pair almost. So in this instance, the anything on the left-hand side is going to be a key, and then the value is going to be on the right-hand side or in blue. So for the results key, we have the full value of policy 1. If I did something like this and say I had like 1,000 policies, in the results, you would have 1,000 different results. The this little square bracket here indicates a list of items. So I don't want to go too far down this, but just understand it's probably a good idea to understand what dictionaries um, do and how you can parse through them. So what I have here is my iPhone, and it's actually being mirrored using this app called Lonely Screen AirPlay Receiver. I've paid for this, so this isn't sponsored by them or anything like that. Take a look here. Um, and we're going to go ahead and start with building out our request. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the top right there and add a new shortcut. We can rename the shortcut however we want. Enable, disable, policy 1, something meaningful. We'll add an action. The action we're going to add is get. Actually, I find that if you type post, oddly enough, get contents of URL is the action. I've already pre-copied the URL, so that's this. And if we take a look under here, the method is going to be get. I don't have any headers in this case. So if I just do done here and run this, allow, it's going to do this the first time. You can see we're getting the full JSON back. If we expand this out a little bit, here's everything. Oh, there's status right there. But what we're going to do after this is I'm going to type in dictionary. Remember what we talked a little bit about dictionaries a moment ago? So we're going to create a dictionary from the contents of the URL. And if I were to play this one more time, it's still the dictionary. It's our JSON, but we've serialized it, or I'm sorry, deserialized it into something we can work with now. Now we can add another action that is going to find me the results. That's going to parse out the results for us. So what we're going to do is, again, dictionary, get dictionary value. The key we're looking for is results. Say done. And if I run that again, now this is just the results. Now I want to get the value for the status key in results. Dictionary, again, get dictionary value for status. And I want to make this a little less. So for results, return. So, and the type is text, and you may find that you have to set this more than once, and there's a reason for this. And that will be in a moment. That will be apparent in a moment. Okay, so if I run this again, boom, there's your status, disable. Now, wait a minute, timeout. prove it that it's the actual, prove that it's the actual value we're after. Okay, that's fine. Let's go back in here and go to firewall policy, and we'll enable this policy. Set status enable, and then we'll go back to our screen, and I'll run this again. Status is enable. Okay, good deal. Great. Now we've been able to retrieve the value. And you'll say, hey, time out. I want to be able to enable or disable this policy on demand. So why can't I just make a put call, two buttons, one with a put for enable, one with a put for disable? And you can absolutely do this. The goal I'm trying to reach here is for you and I not to have to think too hard about what state the policy's in. If it's disabled and you push the button, you enable it. If it's enabled and you push the button, it disables it. So moving on from there, now that we have the value of status from the results, we need to do something with it. Specifically, an if. Okay, so if, we'll call it results, and it's actually status. If status, so if we go out of here, condition, this is what I mean by setting the value to text. If you take a look at that, does not have any value or has any value. This is not very useful for us. We're looking for a specific value here. Specifically, if I go to status, and yes, while the type is set to text, we need to set it to text again. Close it out and set the condition. Now, let's say if status is enable, we can get contents of URL. Okay. We're going to move this guy here. Right. So he's get contents of no. We're going to clear this guy out. Yes. URL. Paste. There we go. There's our URL again. This time we're going to change the method to put. And we're going to add two keys. One is going to be a number, and the other is going to be text. Policy ID is going to be our number key, and status is going to be, so if it's enable, we're going to say disable. Done. Okay, great. So if it's enabled, we're going to disable it. But what if it's disabled? Otherwise, so I'll add another one of those. Can I replicate this? No. Okay, so get here. Get contents of URL. Again, I'm going to move this under, and nope, it's not going to be status. We're going to clear that out, paste our URL there one more time. Okay, and we're going to do a put again. In this case, remember we've got if status is enable, disable it, but if otherwise, we're going to go ahead and set our headers. No, we don't need the new header. We need double check this. Yep, request body, add a new field. Again, one's going to be a number. The other is going to be text. Policy ID 1 and status is enable. Okay, great. Done. So now that we've got this built out, let's give it a shot. I'm going to add one more thing at the end after this, but let's actually validate that this is working. If we take a look, our policy is set to disable. So if I run this real quick, it should enable the policy. And I'll show you again. We'll hit the little play button there at the bottom and refresh this, and it'll show you the policy. So let's add a little bit of something at the end that will get us the value after our little if then statement goes and give us a notification for that. So through the magic of video editing, I've gone ahead and built out the last little bit. So after the end if, I built out another get contents um, of the URL. So it's the same URL we've been using this entire time, including the session token or the access token. Get the dictionary from contents of the URL. Get the value of results from the dictionary we created, and then get the value for status and results. And then for show notification, we're going to show a notification that gives us policy one status equals status. So that'll just basically tell us what it is. And when we run this, we'll get a little buzz saying, hey, your status is enable or disable. Okay. If you just take a look, it's a repetition of what we did up above, but instead of the if statement, I just went ahead and took the value and put it in a notification. You don't have to do this part. For me, it's just confirmation that it did what I wanted it to do. So what I can do is I can run it here. It'll run through all that. And I likely will not get a notification because I'm screen mirroring right now. However, if I come down here, what is going on? So let's do done. And no notification. There's our notification. Status is disable. If I do it again, status is enable. And if I do it yet again, status is disable. In this video, we've gone ahead and we've covered building a REST API admin, assigning the appropriate access to that admin, building out a request using PostMan, and then narrowing down the information we actually need to provide to automate this or to make this a little easier through the Shortcuts app. And then we've built the shortcut. What our shortcut does is it first starts with getting the contents of the API, and we start drilling down into the data. We create a dictionary from the full results we get, and then we get the value of the results, and then we get a specific value of the status of this particular policy, and in this case, it's policy ID 1. From there, if it's set to enable, then we want to go ahead and disable the policy. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and enable the policy. At the end, just as a little bit of extra kind of a bonus and confirmation of what we did, we're going to go ahead and query that policy again and display a notification for the status of that policy. Just as a final note, if you don't have access to FNDN, make sure you get in touch with your account manager and their systems engineer. They can sponsor you for access so you have the full access to the API. I really do want to thank you for watching this video. I look forward to our next video together.